The morning light crept through the high-glass windows of Stanton Enterprises, bouncing off polished floors that gleamed under Claire's careful hand. She'd been there since before sunrise, as always. 10 years of quiet dedication, of arriving before anyone else and leaving long after the lights went out. The building felt like a second home, every creak and hum familiar. She hummed softly as she wiped the marble counters in the lobby, remembering when she'd first been hired. Nervous, grateful, and determined to prove herself. Her co-workers adored her. She'd listened to their worries, celebrated their small victories, even brought cookies on Fridays. To most, she wasn't just a janitor. She was part of the soul of the place. But that morning, something felt off. The new CEO, Derek Stanton, had arrived earlier than usual, striding through the hallway with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. He was young, ambitious, and ruthless, known for cutting costs and smiling while doing it. Claire offered him her usual polite, "Good morning, Mr. Stanton," as she stepped aside, mop in hand. He didn't answer, just looked at her as if she were part of the furniture and kept walking. Her smile faded slightly, though she quickly brushed it off. She'd seen men like him before, sharp suits, colder hearts. By noon, whispers floated around the office. "He's making changes," someone murmured near the coffee machine. "Departments are being cut." Claire continued her work quietly, pretending not to hear. Still, her chest tightened. Around 3 in the afternoon, her supervisor approached her nervously. "Claire, Mr. Stanton wants to see you." In his office. The words made her stomach drop. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way upstairs, her heart thudding with every step. The glass office at the top floor seemed colder than usual, the air thick with the scent of power and polished wood. Derek didn't look up when she entered. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked softly. He finally raised his eyes, and in that moment she knew. There was no warmth, no recognition, just business. "Claire," he began, folding his hands. "You've been with the company a long time, haven't you?" She nodded. 10 years, sir." "Yes, 10 years." He sighed as if rehearsing empathy. "Unfortunately, we're restructuring. We have to make some tough decisions, and your position has been deemed unnecessary." The words sliced through her like glass. She stood there, her fingers gripping the edge of her cleaning cart, trying to keep her voice steady. I understand, sir." Derek leaned back in his chair, already glancing at his computer. "HR will handle your paperwork. You can finish the day and collect your things." Claire swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Stanton," she whispered as she turned to leave. He didn't even look up again. Outside the office, a few employees stared at her with pity. One young assistant offered a hesitant, "I'm so sorry, Claire," but she only smiled faintly. "It's all right, dear. Everything happens for a reason." Then she pushed her cart down the hallway for the last time, the soft squeak of its wheels echoing behind her, each sound a quiet farewell to 10 years of unseen devotion. The night air was crisp, the city skyline glittering in the distance as black cars rolled up the driveway of the Caldwell estate, the private mansion belonging to the company's elusive majority owner. No one really knew much about Mr. Caldwell. Some said he was old money. Others whispered that he rarely appeared in public and left everything to his board. But tonight, he had personally invited the new CEO, Derek Stanton, for a private dinner. To Derek, it felt like his big moment, the moment he'd finally be acknowledged by the man who controlled everything. He adjusted his tie in the car mirror, rehearsing polite lines of gratitude and ambition. "Just be sharp," he muttered to himself. Show him he made the right choice. The butler opened the grand double doors, and Derek stepped into a hall filled with soft piano music and the scent of aged wood and expensive wine. Candlelight flickered across portraits of stern ancestors watching from the walls. He followed the butler's quiet steps toward the dining room, his shoes echoing faintly against the marble floor. But the moment he entered, his confident smile froze. At the far end of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Caldwell, silver-haired, dignified, with an expression that could silence a crowd. But what made Derek's stomach twist wasn't the man's presence. It was the woman seated beside him. Claire. She was unrecognizable. Her hair was neatly pinned up, her dress a deep emerald silk that shimmered beneath the candlelight. She looked poised, calm, radiant even, but her eyes held something colder now, something distant. Derek blinked in disbelief, words catching in his throat. "Good evening, Mr. Stanton," Mr. Caldwell said evenly. "Please, have a seat." Derek hesitated, glancing once more at Claire before sitting down across from them. He struggled to find his voice. "Sir, I wasn't expecting—" "I imagine not," Caldwell interrupted gently, sipping his wine. "You've made quite a name for yourself in a short time. Cost-cutting, restructuring, decisive leadership." His tone was calm, but each word carried weight. "My wife tells me you've been very thorough." Derek's pulse quickened. Wife? The word slammed into him like a blow. He turned his gaze to Claire, who sat perfectly still, her hands folded elegantly in her lap. She didn't look at him, didn't say a word. Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying Derek as though dissecting him. "You know," he continued, "Claire spent 10 years in that building. 10 years quietly serving everyone, learning everything about the people who work for us. I insisted on it." His eyes glinted. "You see, I believe you can tell more about a company from its janitor than from its executives." Derek swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Sir, I had no idea." Caldwell raised a hand to silence him. "No, you didn't. That's the problem, Mr. Stanton. You didn't care to know. You saw a woman with a mop and assumed she was disposable." He turned his head slightly toward Claire. "My wife wanted to experience humility firsthand. She wanted to see who would treat her as human, and who would not." Finally, Claire's gaze lifted. Her eyes met Derek's, steady, unreadable. "It's ironic, isn't it?" she said softly. "You spent the whole day talking about company values and teamwork, but you never looked anyone in the eye unless they wore a suit." Her words cut sharper than any reprimand. Derek tried to stammer a defense, but his voice betrayed him. The room had turned colder, heavier, the silence stretching like a sentence being written in the air. Then Mr. Caldwell smiled faintly, though his eyes remained hard. "Let's eat," he said. "After all, it's important to know who's really at the table." Dinner stretched on like a silent interrogation. Every sound, the clink of silverware, the soft pour of wine, seemed painfully loud in the vast dining room. Derek barely touched his food. He could feel Claire's quiet presence beside her husband like a mirror reflecting every careless act of arrogance he'd ever committed. Mr. Caldwell, calm but deliberate, savored each bite as though measuring the seconds before judgment. Finally, he set down his fork and dabbed the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin. "You know, Derek," he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "when I first hired you, I saw promise, drive, ambition, but tonight I see something else. Emptiness." Derek looked up, his face pale. "Sir, I assure you I've done everything to—" "Save money," Caldwell interrupted quietly, "at the cost of integrity." He leaned forward, his eyes unblinking. "You dismissed a woman who gave this company more loyalty than most of your executives combined. A woman who worked through holidays, who stayed late during storms to keep the offices safe. You didn't even ask her name before you signed the order." Derek's breath hitched. His voice faltered. I didn't know she was your wife." Caldwell's hand struck the table, not with rage but with the sharp authority of a gavel. "That's exactly the point. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The words thundered through the room, echoing off the marble. Claire sat still, her eyes glistening, though not with pity. For years, she'd cleaned those same halls he ruled with cruelty, watching people like Derek look through her as if she were invisible. Now, every silent humiliation, every ignored greeting, found its voice. Caldwell's expression softened slightly as he turned to her. "My dear, do you wish for me to reconsider his position?" he asked. Claire looked at Derek, his expensive suit, his trembling hands, the arrogance now stripped away. Her answer was quiet, almost tender. "No, love. I think he's learned what it feels like to be unseen." The owner nodded slowly, then turned back to Derek. "You're dismissed, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Derek stood shakily, color draining from his face. "Please, Mr. Caldwell, I can fix this." But Claire interrupted him for the first time, her voice steady as marble. "Some things can't be fixed, Mr. Stanton. They can only be remembered." She rose gracefully from her seat, the soft rustle of her dress breaking the silence. As Derek was led out, he caught one last glimpse of her hand resting on Caldwell's, the same gentle hand that had once cleaned his office desk without complaint. He finally understood who she was and what he had lost, not just his job, but his humanity. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. Inside, Claire exhaled deeply, as if releasing 10 years of silent endurance. Caldwell leaned toward her, his voice low and proud. "You were magnificent." She smiled faintly. Her eyes still distant. "I didn't do it for revenge," she murmured. "I did it so he'd never forget that power means nothing without decency." Then she reached for her husband's hand again, the candles flickering between them as the storm that had followed her for a decade finally went quiet.